Greetings. Hello. How are you all? It's good to see you. On behalf of the Jindal School of International Affairs of OB Jindal Global University in India, I want to welcome you to this special webinar. I can see people joining in from dozens of countries around the world, and that is truly the whole promise and potential of online education, which we are delivering in partnership with Coursera in the form of the online masters in international relations, security, and strategy. This is actually the second semester which is about to begin for the program, but we are admitting a second cohort in spring. There's already a cohort that's coming in fall from nearly 25 countries, and admissions are open. So I want to flag that for your attention at the outset. We believe that there is a tremendous enthusiasm and energy around the world in learning in the online masters in international relations, security, and strategy, and we are here to support this cause. But today, to begin with, I would like to bring to your attention, introduce you to a star panel of experts from among our faculty members. Many of them are scholar practitioners who've been ambassadors and have held senior diplomatic positions for their countries and have served with great distinction. Many of them are also teaching in the online MAIRSS program, and I'm really privileged. Let me just briefly, in the interest of time, acknowledge the presence of ambassadors Abdul Fattah Ammourah, Ambassador Ravi Thapar, Ambassador Jitendra Mishra, Ambassador Hasib Mohammed, and I also have Ambassador Mohan Kumar. My colleagues, Professor Kim Emmanuel, Professor Devika Mishra are also with us, and so is Professor Tatiana Belusova. So we have here a panel drawn from based on their expertise on various regions of the world. And I would like to begin this discussion about global risks by raising some contemporary crises which are foremost on our minds and which are hogging the headlines right now, and is something that's a cause for great concern worldwide as to what is likely to happen in these regions. So we'll do a bit of a regional tour, panoramic tour of different regional hotspots, have a bit of a discussion on that, and then come back to the MAIRSS queries, as well as general comments and questions from all of you potential students or simply interested onlookers. I welcome all of you. Do use the chat box. I know that many of you are posting in it. So we look forward to more comments from all of you. So global risks. The point is, we are living in dangerous times. There's no doubt about it. This is not a normal era. It's certainly not a very orderly or a peaceful era. You can see there are war clouds hovering over many regions, and you can see resurgence of violence. You can see potential unrest and overthrow of regimes and governments happening. And you can see a general sense of restlessness across the world, that things are not settled, things are not in order, and there may be more disorder than order at present. And you can see that in terms of the number of armed conflicts and the violent incidents that are happening around the world, the risks being posed to businesses. We will also talk about economic risks and risks to businesses, and what to expect from this year and the coming years, given what seemed to be the failure of institutions and the weakness of major powers to be able to maintain stability in different parts of the world. And all of you, as concerned citizens of your respective countries and citizens of this world, you should be equally concerned and should be joining hands with us in thinking about potential ways out of these crises. So let me start with my colleague, Professor Tatiana Belusova, who is from Russia. And as you know, right now, there's no bigger crisis on the global mind than on what is happening on the borders involving Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And there are many viewpoints as to what is likely to happen. There have been a lot of alarming stories that have come out from the US government and on the Western media, believing that there is an imminent war or an invasion that's going to happen. On the other hand, the Ukrainians say that, well, we should not be panicking, but they are concerned. And then there are the Russians who believe that they are only acting defensively, and that they do not intend to invade. But and then there is this whole guessing game: will he or won't he, about Vladimir Putin, and what is in his mind? People, nobody knows. But then the point is, something has changed in a way that was not the case for at least 30 years. It looks like the present security architecture in Europe is not likely to last the way it was, or at least the way the US expected it to be. So something is churning, and we would hope there is no war. We would hope there is no overthrow of any regime or any coup. And we certainly don't want refugees and another big humanitarian crisis in Europe. But anything is possible. And that's the whole beauty of international relations, international security and strategy, what we're studying in our master's program. It's a glorious uncertainty. So Tatiana, Professor Tatiana Belisova, what do you think is the crux of the matter there? And how do you think this is going to evolve? And what is the risk you see, with this simmering, or it's not simmering anymore, it's on boiling point, because there's, mobilization of troops on both sides, and it could be a broader European war and not just limited to even Ukraine. So how could it happen that things have come to such a dire situation? Your assessment, Tatiana, please.
Yeah, this is very unfortunate, isn't it? That kind of standoff happened between the nations which are supposed to treat each other as brothers and sisters. I think the entire conflict was fueled largely by misinformation and what we can call information hysteria. There are lots of exaggerations on the part of the Western powers. They have created this kind of Frankenstein, the monster out of Russia. And they have kept portraying Russia as an aggressor, spoiler, rules breaker. And I think the key point here is that Russian government tries to convey the message that enough is enough. We are not talking, I'm sure that war is not going to happen. There will be no all-out war between Russia and Ukraine, simply because when you conduct the kind of cost and benefits analysis, then definitely a cost will overweigh hugely. And we should keep that in mind. So I think we should cross out the possibility of all-out war. But what Russian government is trying to convey is that, like I mentioned before, enough is enough. And it's mainly about NATO expansion, as we have heard on multiple occasions. That has happened already throughout the last decades. There have been several rounds of expansions, and now the patience of Russian government just somewhat has run out. And we should understand these concerns. And I just don't understand why Western powers, NATO and its allies, why they have failed to understand Russia's concerns in terms of its national security. I mean, no country in this world would be happy when the forces, which are not entirely friendly to Russia, they are coming closer and closer towards Russian border.
Tatiana, let me interject there. Do you think this lack of understanding is primarily because of the mistrust relating to the regime? And the perception in the West is that Russia is an authoritarian regime, and that basically, Navalny is in jail and Putin is a dictator, and so we can never trust him. That kind of liberal mindset, seems to be a very significant player here, because there's this instinctive, and some of it is also left over from the Cold War period, right? There's this notion that the Kremlin, it's very secretive and dark, and who knows what they're planning, they're like villains. So there is that whole thing, and probably that is one of the, and then they say Ukraine is a democracy as opposed to Russia, which is not. How much of this liberal ideology you think is one of the big, probably a barrier to understanding right now between all the concerned parties at the interstate level?
You see, when I heard, I think it was 1 week ago, there was this United Nations Security Council meeting, and a Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Vasily Nebenza, he said the Western powers, they largely behave like they are asking for war. Now you see, now they have sent troops to Poland, and troops on the ground. So it's just like, you're right. I personally, I have the feeling that there is this growing frustrations with Russia. You see, you mentioned Navalny, cracking down on opposition, annexation of Crimea, cyber attacks, then what happened, this Salisbury, right, this poisoning. So you see, the list goes on. And I think now we have reached, it's, like a cumulative effect. Like all these events combined, they have just somehow blown up. And this is what has to do with this exaggeration. I mentioned this exaggeration, it is based on previous events. So the Western powers, US and its allies, they have been largely frustrated with Russia.
And Russia is frustrated so it's vice versa. But what about the diplomacy? There, interesting thing, like during the Cold War, the good thing is that they're talking. I mean, it's not like they're completely just airing accusations at each other. They have had multiple meetings in Europe and in different formats, and they're continuing the top leadership, at the levels of Secretary of State and Foreign Minister. So the dialogue, there's been an exchange. There's a list of demands of the Russians, and the list of counter demands or replies by the West. So at least there is hope that we can avoid the worst outcome, because it seems like they have not completely given up on diplomacy. So should we be hopeful on that front, Tatya?
There have been, you're right, there have been multiple talks on different levels, and even today, very important meetings. Newly elected Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, went to Washington to meet Joe Biden. Emmanuel Macron, interestingly, French President Emmanuel Macron went to Russia to meet personally Vladimir Putin. And you know what? Vladimir Putin personally invited Emmanuel Macron. So Putin selected French president, just someone to talk to, someone from the Western world, from another bloc, we can say, to talk to discuss. So we really, I think all of us should be helpful that there will be this, the diplomatic solution will be found. But unfortunately, the previous talks, they have not brought any positive outcomes. We should admit that. But at the same time, you see, I think eventually what is going to happen is that both sides need to find a compromise. No, both sides need to compromise. Russia should compromise on its demands. And I don't understand why Western countries, they say that this that Russian demand about further enlargement and bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, why it is a non-starter.
Yeah. Thank you, Tatiana. I think you've clarified the path out. Now let me bring in Ambassador Mohan Kumar. He was India's ambassador to France before joining our faculty. and is teaching in the MAIRSS program of Coursera. Mohan, you have served in Paris, and Tatiana was just talking about the efforts of the Europeans to take an independent position somewhat from the US, and to be somewhat more conciliatory towards Russia. It's especially the Germans are like that, but even the French seem to be like that. So because they don't want a European war, and because they will be the ones to suffer the most, they're dependent on Russian gas, right? So so Mohan, the European capital's perspective, if you can shine some light on it, and they don't, I think they are definitely not taking the hardline position of the US, and they seem to be more pragmatic. With the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is bringing gas from Russia to Germany, and Macron, who Tatiana just mentioned, believes that Europe should become an independent, like a separate power center apart from China and the US. So your thoughts, Mohan, on whether the Europeans, and they have a format of their own, France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia. These four, they have a separate conflict resolution format of their own, but it looked like the US was trying to sideline the Europeans, and now the Europeans are trying to get back in. So your thoughts on this whole, you know this region very well.
Thank you, Sreeram. Most fascinating to listen to Professor Tatiana. No, there are 2-3 factors at work. One is that France holds the presidency of the EU. It's a rotating presidency of 6 months. And whenever a French president gets a chance to strut about on the world stage and do mediation, no president will miss an opportunity like that. It goes back to France, which I think thinks of itself as a very, very grand power. I mean, you have to go back to Charles de Gaulle to understand the French logic. I mean, Nicolas Sarkozy did it when Georgian crisis happened. And this is perfect for Macron, who's smart, who's intelligent, and who kind of, wants to project French power onto the world stage. Remember, there are also elections coming on in May, and the French like to see their president as being very presidential, the global statesman who will bring peace to the world. So that is one factor at work. The second, as you rightly say, is what is known as the Normandy format, which is you've got you've got Russia and Ukraine, and then you've got France and Germany. If in an ideal world, this issue should be dealt with by Europe, really. I mean, there is no place for anybody else, frankly. And which is why I would urge those who are interested to see the Indian statement. We abstained when the issue came to the Security Council. And in our statement, we mentioned Normandy format 4 times and Minsk Accords 3 times. In a very brief statement. So for us, the issue is clear because we are doing a very tightrope balancing act between United States and Russia, and we have good relations with both. So that is the second thing I would say. But I do have one question for Professor Tatiana, if you allow me. I mean, she is right. Most of the things that she has said, I can accept. But there is one thing that is a source of puzzle. And I believe that was a provocative act, if you don't mind my saying it, Tatiana. The Russian troops which have been brought to the border, and it is reported there are 100,000 troops. I am told 50 to 55,000 are permanently stationed there anyway. So we will leave out the 50 or 55,000. You still have to accept that bringing 45,000 tanks and troops to the border is an act of provocation. So that is one on which I would like your reaction. Everything else that you say about the positions, I completely accept. But this is something which set off this whole crisis. And to me, that was the beginning of this whole issue. But to finish my brief remarks, I agree with Professor Tatiana's assessment that an all-out war will not be in the interest of everybody. But having said that, people do sleepwalk into crisis. One of the things that we teach in this course, Sreeram, as you know very well, is we give instances in history where leaders, what is known as the law of unintended consequences, especially in international relations. I mean, this is not a cricket match or this is not a baseball match in which you can calibrate your moves in accordance with the opponent. You can't predict how things will happen. So I would say that, it cannot be said with absolute certainty that there is no war. I would conclude by pointing out to a very important geopolitical development, which is the joint statement of China and Russia, which I would request everybody, every student to read. It's a tremendous geopolitical development. China, for the first time ever, has supported Russia in its opposition to NATO enlargement. This is a matter on which China has never passed a judgment in the past. Now they have. So, seeing Sreeram is a fragmentation of the strategy. I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time, but I think we are seeing a fragmentation of the strategic landscape with China and Russia on the one hand and NATO-led US on the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. I think Professor Belusua was also talking about a block and the Cold War terminology is still here, and it does look like there are two camps out there. Although the Sino-Russian tight partnership is not really a military alliance, and they have internal issues between them, but nonetheless, there is a kind of an alignment. And we in India have often been asking the US to take a kind of a Kissingerian grand strategy where they isolate China and work out their problems with Russia, but it's not happening. In fact, Russia, China are going closer, as you saw with the opening ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics, where Vladimir Putin was present. But I'll let Tatiana come back on the point of the troops, but we have other crises. There are a lot of global risks out there. And I want to step aside to another region, which is the Middle East. Many of you in the audience must have been intrigued by the news reports about the violence in Hasaka in Syria, and the prison break and the very large number of ISIS jihadists who attacked a prison which was being controlled by the Kurdish guerrillas and which outside the control of the Syrian state. And there was a long and bloody siege that lasted for several days. And across the border in Iraq also, ISIS attacks, beheadings, there is a sudden resurgence. So those of us who thought that the caliphate is over, the so-called caliphate, they want to revive it, and they are resorting to extremely brutal and also tactically smart maneuvers where they are putting pressure on all governments as well as so-called semi-autonomous regions like the Kurdish authorities. Everybody is under pressure. And Professor Ammourah, who is a distinguished Syrian diplomat and minister, and who is our vice dean and teaches Arabic and also diplomacy and diplomatic negotiations for us, is actually joining us from Damascus. So Professor Ammourah, your thoughts, is ISIS coming back? And if so, what is the meaning of all these years of the so-called counterinsurgency and the counterterrorism operations? It looks like Al-Qaeda, well, you can say that maybe that is kind of a weakened organization now, but the ISIS attraction still seems to be there, and there's a large number of their prisoners who are still, nobody is willing to take them back, and they're all being held in these Kurdish areas. There are thousands of them there, and the UN says that this is a major risk of a resurgence of terrorism in the whole region. So despite almost 10 years of fighting in the region around you, it looks like this ISIS problem has not been solved. Rather, it seems to be is prepared for a comeback. So your thoughts on this big danger or this threat, and how can we really control this menace?
Well, thank you very much, my dear. As a matter of fact, after the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Iraq, Syria found itself in a very, and the occupation of Iraq, as a matter of fact, found itself in a very crooked situation. The Americans in the East and the problems of Lebanon at that time in the South, the Israelis in the East, in the West, the Israelis in the South, the Turks also in the North. So as a matter of fact, to one to be very pragmatic. Arab Spring events and the issue of terrorists and Al-Qaeda and so on started since then, beginning originally in Afghanistan, which was Taliban was supported by the Americans, and Al-Qaeda started and supported not only by the Americans, but also by their allies, whereby the Saudis and the Wahhabists, so on. So this interface have already interface struggle and disputes was the model for the future destabilization and reshaping of the politics of the Middle East. And this is in the words of George W. Bush when, invading Iraq and so on. We want to reshape the politics of the Middle East, but on what model? To be a model for the whole region. As such, Arab Spring events came up, which was very timely after the failure of all measures, all initiatives for peace and for stability and development. To go back to Europe, I can tell you something which is very in this one press conference of the foreign minister Walid, late foreign minister Walid Al-Muallim. He said a statement that we forgot Europe on the map. Well, as a matter of fact, at that time, I was deputy foreign minister, and the European Troika came, wanted to know some explanation, what does he mean? And they came to me and I met them. And I said very simply, every country in the world has the three maps: geographical map, political map, and economic and development maps. Geographical map is the international borders, legitimate, internationally well-recognized borders. In that respect, our borders have been, violated, and we want the liberation of our territory.
So Hasaka is actually out of, Hasaka is right now geographically part of Syria, where this ISIS resurgence is happening, but it's outside the Syrian.
I will come to that, my dear, just to, if, I don't know how long time I'm given, but I will move
2 minutes,
to
sir.
your questions. Yeah, So after the withdrawal of the American from Afghanistan, Taliban is back, Al-Qaeda is back. So there is a grand strategic agenda by the Americans. And that agenda is to keep the world boiling. Conflicts everywhere is threatening. One wonders, why would the external powers, whenever the Syrian army and their allies and so on attack the terrorists and the ISIS people and also Al-Qaeda and so on, then all of a sudden the American forces bombard the Syrian army? That is, in a way, a kind of supporting those in order to create that instability in the region. Why the Americans are there? They want simply the oil, simply the gas, the energy. They want to be on the ground, and they said it openly in that. Why they are in occupying, supporting all this. The Turks, for example, are also supporting the terrorists from the very beginning on this. Whenever the Syrian government and army and people, despite of all the devastation that has happened, that they are working hard in order to put an end to terrorism, to Al-Qaeda. And this is what has been expressed by President Bashar al-Assad. Yes, we are on the course of reform, process of reform, but reform with this sanctions is impossible. Just to tell you frankly, last night while I was preparing to join, there was no electricity. And I have to rush to buy a big battery, which I managed in order to do. So no battery, no gas. People are impoverished. Sanctions are hurting. So they want to liquidate the state, the central state, in order to create a vacuum. And this vacuum, if it is created with no central power, who will be in whose interest? It will be filled by the ISIL, and this is the chance for them. You remember, and my colleague remember also, that there has been a lot of talks about Syria going back to the League of Arab States to take its seats back. But only Qatar and Saudi said no. So we are not in a hurry, as a matter of fact. We are a member anyway. And then our seat is suspended, our membership is suspended for the moment. But unless we put up and finish with the terrorist itself, it will be very, very difficult and very risky, not only for Syria, but for the whole region.
Right, sir. So
yeah.
Thank you. The points are well taken. The Syrian state has been kept weak. There are there's a lot of bad blood going back for 10 years of the long war, and as a result of this weakness, you have vacuums that could be filled by dangerous actors, and we are seeing that now in the so-called resurgence of ISIS. So certainly this is a major issue and something that's likely to and not just remain limited to the Middle East, because the ISIS ideology is global, and we know many parts of the world where so-called lone wolves or just online radicalized young people have taken inspiration from ISIS and are carrying out attacks. So this is, and to see the ISIS take a stand against the Kurdish and the Americans for nearly 1 week in Hasaka, it is going to it has already raised the morale of the ISIS supporters worldwide. So this is not looking good, and this is something that's likely to be a major threat. I'll try and come back to this in questions, but let me move to another region of the world, which is of course India's backyard, the Indo-Pacific. And here I want to bring in Ambassador J.N. Mishra, who has served in the ASEAN region and who has vast understanding of it. He recently wrote an important piece about Vietnam and India cooperation. Ambassador Mishra, I'd like you to come in on the whole question of, the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, which are like perpetual crises for the moment, because the global attention has shifted to Ukraine and to Europe. There's a bit of a breather. It seems like China is getting a breather, courtesy the Russian confrontation with Ukraine, because otherwise the focus until last few months or until last month or two was very much on Taiwan and the potential of a war breaking out over potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And now this year, 2022, Xi Jinping has a major party congress where he's likely to get a third term and break all the precedents. He has rewritten the constitution and is strengthening his control over power like no one else. He's hosting the Beijing Olympics very triumphantly and cocking a snook at the West. So, and making common cause with Russia. Now, definitely this China is emboldened. They've even had high economic growth of 8% in 2021, despite the global pandemic. Their exports are booming. Most countries, including the US and India, our trade balance is getting more and more adverse with China. So your thoughts on this theater, and what are the risks here, and how can we avoid this, and what do you think are the mechanisms here in Asia to stop this Chinese juggernaut as we see it? Ambassador Mishra.
Well, talking about the Taiwan crisis, as you said, Professor Chaulia, China has a breather right now, but that is purely at the tactical level. It is a central concern for China because it's a core issue. Taiwan has always been a core issue. It will be, because it is historically, indisputably a part of the Chinese nation. Tibet is not like that. That's a very important difference. Now, China is a vastly more powerful country today than it was 30, 40, or 50 years ago. What does it mean? It has all the cards. It has the balance in its favor. Therefore, it can, in my opinion, act in a more pragmatic and relaxed way. The Americans themselves have made conflicting statements. There was apparently what appeared to be a statement by President Biden that if China attacks Taiwan, we will come to Taiwan's aid. And immediately, the Department of State clarified that to say, no, we believe in a one China policy. Now, that is the bottom line policy of the United States. So therefore, I don't see beyond a tactical, the scale can go up and down a little bit. I don't see this flaring into war because I don't think the Americans are willing to fight Taiwan's war if China invades Taiwan. And China doesn't have to invade Taiwan because it has all the cards anyway. It is already a winner by being far more powerful than before. Now, what does it do for countries like India? Now, India is under tremendous pressure for precisely that reason, because China is more relaxed about Taiwan, firstly, because it's powerful, and secondly, as Dr. Sreeram Chaulia said, because the focus is on Ukraine. I'm frankly baffled. I was going to say what Professor Mohan Kumar said, actually, that this joint statement, and this is where sports comes in. Sports becomes an arena for geopolitics. The Beijing Olympics become for the joint statement about NATO expansion between Presidents Putin and Xi. Now, that's a very, very important fundamental change, but all that happened in the 1950s. China and Russia were partners, and the US and the West were partners, two different sides. Now, today, China is the senior partner. At that time, the Soviet Union was the senior partner. The roles may have changed, but it is something like that. And India is isolated. I'm really frankly baffled that the Americans talk so much about supporting India to face China, but what have they done? Why are they putting pressure on Russia in Ukraine? It does India no good, CATSA and things like that. It does India no good because their policy, if they are serious about containing China, their policy should be to strengthen countries like Russia, which is a declining power, though it is trying to rise once again. And you are not really strengthening a country like India at all by doing that kind of thing. And I see a kind of leaving India in the lurch kind of policy. And that's why we are seeing tremendous pressure. And I'm baffled that the Indian public is not concerned about this. Trade is $125 billion.
Yeah.
The pressure, the renaming of names in Arunachal Pradesh and the border, the new law on the border management and all these things are tremendous. It's a tremendous pressure, existential pressure against India.
So Ambassador Mishra, if you are Xi Jinping and you are eyeing a third term and a coronation or becoming a president for life, and you have been at loggerheads with India on the disputed border for more than 2 years now. How does it look? I mean, do you think there could be a conflagration again? We still have, by the way, people have forgotten this, and I want all the audience, the students, to recall or know that while there is a hype about a Russian presence of 100,000 forces on the border with Ukraine and Belarus, the Chinese have massed 50 to 60,000 troops at the high altitudes in Aksai Chin on the border with Ladakh, with India. And we have done equal mirror deployments of 50 to 60,000 of our troops. They have been staying on those icy heights where it's minus 40 degrees Celsius and visibility is very low for almost 2 years now, eyeball to eyeball in many places. So there is that threat too. So Ambassador Mishra, this year, can we resolve and push the Chinese out of these positions? I mean, there are still a couple of places where they are still adamant and staying put. They have vacated a few after India applied countervailing pressure, but they are still there. The crisis, the India-China crisis, is not over, and maybe there could be some incident that could trigger. And every now and then you hear about some unfortunate developments along either the eastern sector or the western sector of the border, if the central sector is somewhat stable. So your thoughts on this? I mean, if you're China and you are saying they're confident about Taiwan because they can crush it, and the Americans are not sure about coming to the rescue of Taiwan. But what about India? They can't be so confident. They have suffered losses. India is a much bigger country. It doesn't have to be capability parity, right? I mean, in military parlance. It doesn't have to be equally matched. As long as there is a potential to hurt China, they will be wary of carrying out more incursions. But there could be incident, there could be violence again, and that could be a major risk. We are not talking about Russia versus Ukraine or China versus Taiwan, where there is total asymmetry. India versus China is a big Asian or even a world war.
Absolutely. That depends more on India than China, whether there will be a conflict and deaths more than just pushing and jostling. Depends entirely on India, because China has achieved its short-term objectives through the actions of 2020, by and large, because they wanted to respond to India's border infrastructure, the changes in the domestic politics of Jammu and Kashmir, etc. So they have sent a message to India. Now, India is not a pushover, as you say. India is not, say, I won't take names, but countries in Southeast Asia, for example. India is willing to fight and die and to kill, literally. And that's what has happened. And there are confirmed reports. Nobody can prove it. And I'm baffled by the Western media. They say at least 20 Indian soldiers died, and China has said 4 soldiers died. It should be the other way around. India declared 20 died immediately. China is, they are not being, they're not coming clean on this. They only said 4 martyrs were recognized. They didn't say that only 4 died. So it's a very important difference. Now, the Western media is bafflingly siding with China in that way. So it depends on India, because as China has made statements recently, we should move from emergency border management to more stable long-term management. What does it mean? We have achieved our objectives. So you Indians, either you take it, or are you willing to fight with us? Now, so that depends entirely on India. And India is not going to give in, I can assure you, because India is a strong country. There doesn't have to be symmetry. Mountain warfare doesn't depend on military symmetry. It depends on so many factors. Indians are good fighters, and the Chinese know that. And we probably give them more of a bloody nose.
Let's hope the deterrence and the pushback will work, at least from an Indian point of view. But that is one of the risks, dear students and members in the audience. We want to highlight that just because it's off the radar a little bit, we are keeping it low profile, not much is being talked about. Don't discount another flare-up between China and India, or possibly some kind of a solution this year. But let me move on to other issues. When we talk of global risk, it's not only political, and frankly, political doesn't mean only geopolitical. There are also economic risks. I want to bring in Ambassador Ravi Thapar, our executive dean, and he teaches economic diplomacy, and he's one of our core faculty members at Jindal. So Ambassador Thapar, your thoughts, you observe the global economic trends quite closely, and you see what is happening with the COVID downturn and the effort by various countries to rebound. It's not looking good. There were hopes of a positive recovery in 2022, but now most of these have been confounded by the new variants. That risk has not gone away, and we don't know where is the end point to this long stretched economic crisis that began 2020, early 2020. So how do you see things going forward for global economy? IMF, OECD, all of them are actually downgrading the forecast now and cutting 1 or 2 points. You don't see that same kind of bouncer optimism that was there 6 months ago or even 4 months ago. So it's a gloomy period for the global economy, and very few countries seem to be out of the woods. So your thoughts, Ambassador, on the economic risks, and what can we do to avoid the worst outcomes of these? I mean, many countries, there is social unrest, mass unemployment, regimes could collapse, there could be revolts and revolutions. We are seeing, protest movements gather storm in many parts of the world. So the economic pressure and risks are tremendous. So your thoughts on this, Ambassador Thapar? Could you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Professor. This is, in fact, also a very existential aspect. It's not just the political risks. I think the political risks are escalating as COVID is somewhat subsiding. The hope, I think, is that a lot of vaccinations are taking place, and countries, including India, are now beefing up vaccination supplies. There's no other escape because if any section or part of the world gets infected, the danger is, including Africa, which I believe has not had too much infection, but if it does, the virus will mutate and hit back. So that is point number one. But we need to beef up the ongoing initiatives under the WHO. India has been sharing its know-how. It's also been exporting vaccines free. Uh, I must say, though, that the coronavirus has certainly dented into revenues, and the situation is very, very tight. On the one hand, we have global inequality, which has been growing. And the World Inequality Report notes that 10% of the population, the top population, the wealthy population, is walking away with 52% of the global wealth. And the gap between the 10th percent most wealthy people and the bottom 50% has grown by has doubled from 8 to 15 times. And it's also noted that there is inequality in vaccine. As I mentioned, the G20 countries are supposedly, they have received 15 times as many vaccine dosages as compared to some of the other countries. The UN estimates that between 2015 and 2015 and 2030, the world, on an average, the developing countries will need about $5 to $7 trillion budget expenditure every year in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. So the kitty has been hit very badly. As it is, the sustainable development goals were not being implemented, were not being optimally attended to. I think there is a further danger that this will be neglected. The good thing is that there is emerging consensus, the NGOs are active, and there is global attention on the downside, because if we don't reformat things quickly, this will get very, very severe. We should also know a basic principle here that unless the developing world, the southern countries, are more prosperous, they will not be able to buy the goods and services of the north. So it's only a question of time before the recession and downsizing starts hitting the global northern countries. Now, what is therefore, there's one other point I'd like to mention. A good initiative for the first time, I believe the IMF Managing Director has noted the largest allocation of special drawing rights, SDRs, was issued in August 2021 to the tune of $650 billion. And about 21 billion has accrued to some of the most disadvantaged countries. And some of the countries which were in better shape have been more generous and rechanneled it back to the IMF for redistribution. So these are some of the good things which are happening. But the problem is that unless we somehow get more allocation of resources, and we must also remember here the ongoing classical problems of climate change and the issues which anyway confront the developing world. So we were, in fact, the Jindal University had organized a seminar about the global south countries, and it was noticed that unless there is more unified position and coordinated positions by the countries of the south in order to put pressure in the UN, in order to somehow get the majority of the 193 countries in the General Assembly to put pressure on the UN and the permanent members, we are bound to face problems. One of the things which we could do, for example, is to deal more with each other. The southern countries can do more intra-south trade, goods and services, and somehow, bolster their sinking revenues. I think the only way, therefore, let me just summarize, is that vaccine, number one, we need to get this on board because this is emergent, this is existential, and we need to get this, distributed, more and more vaccinations. Two, we need to get more multilateral consensus on helping out the southern countries. The SDRs issue is very good, but maybe we should put more pressure on the countries of the north. And as I made an observation yesterday, the UN Charter, I mean, this is a much disputed thing. This has been ongoing for a very long time, but it's not the gospel of God. It is a human created system. And if the countries of the South, there is less politics between them, there is less religious community, political divide between the countries of the South, I think if they take more united and coordinated positions in the UN, I think we can put pressure on the northern countries, and we can get some of the multilateral consensus on climate change, on vaccination, on developmental cooperation, allocation of more resources for SDGs. Some of these issues, including the WTO, I mean, it all resonates from the dissonance and from the differences which exist in the UN. The UN is the apex multilateral organization in the world. So multilateralism must get a boost somehow, and the southern countries have to put pressure, unite, and take coordinated positions. So that's my take.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Thapar. Yeah, I think actually the setback from the COVID crisis, the economic effects have been felt disproportionately in the global south. So really, the shrinking gap between emerging economies and the developed economies has now suddenly started widening again. So everything has been set back by about 30 years. So there are a lot of issues that we in the developing world will have to face, and maybe unity, as Ambassador Thapar is saying, is the key thing for us to emerge out of this crisis that was not of our making, but has now become an all prevalent reality. Okay, now I also have with me my friend Ambassador Hasib Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago. He teaches in the Jindal School of International Affairs, and Hasib does courses both on international law and also on business risk and risk analysis. So Hasib, we've been talking about risk from a geopolitical as well as a macroeconomic point of view. But businesses and for the business community and for firms, it's not looking good, the outlook. So what are your thoughts on the business risks going forward? And some of the political risks obviously have proved to be major setbacks for the business community. So how do we assess the risks going forward for business, Hasib, in this kind of uncertain climate?
Thank you, Dr. Chaulia. Good afternoon to everyone. I do teach an interdisciplinary subject, right? That's called political and business risk. It's not a conventional subject, but some of the topics covered in the course, it's relating to international politics as well as domestic politics. Because when you speak of risk and you speak about the management of the state at the domestic level and then at the international level, you have what we can describe as micro risk and macro risk, right? We are a bit limited on time, so I'll just tell you all quickly. So even within that course, we look at, say, the internal politics of certain countries and some of the issues that come out. Say, for example, if within the idea of risk and business, you have issues of, say, corruption, right, which is a global problem, also a domestic problem for countries around the world, right? Then you have issues of state capture or allegations of state capture, where you see in recent times, say, for example, during the presidency of former South African president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, you had allegations of state capture, right? And then you deal with issues, say, for example, corporate social responsibility. When you have all these foreign investments, say countries, well, large countries like India, where they have many multinationals in different, be it manufacturing, food, and pharma, how do they contribute or how do they give back to society? So corporate social responsibility, it's quite important. And very quickly, just to give you all a case study, right? In the Western Hemisphere, in South America, there's a small country called Guyana, right, which has a population of less than 1 million people. And recently, they had a constitutional crisis, they had a political crisis, and they have, well, the prior government had entered into an economic agreement with ExxonMobil for the exploitation of their oil resources, right? So basically what happened is that the former government collapsed. Then you had a change in government which challenged the ExxonMobil agreement, and basically they started to claim that it was unfair. The people of Guyana would struggle. The American oil company, it's being exploitative. So you see an interaction, right, between law, politics, and well, big business or oil. So it's within that context, within the course, political and business risk analysis, we look at different topics that deal with not just internal or domestic politics, but even politics at the international level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hasib. Yeah, even though the online MAIRS is mainly focused on politics and military and defense type of issues, you cannot ignore the economic and the business angles. So, because they're always either in the forefront or behind the scenes, motivating the states and the other violent non-state actors. So, I also would like to introduce to all of you my colleague, Professor Kim Emmanuel, who's from St. Lucia, one of the small Caribbean island countries. And morning to you, Kim. Your thoughts on Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean? We haven't really had a chance to talk about risks in that region. But what are the top risks for you sitting in St. Lucia, and you're looking at your own country and the broader the Caribbean nations and the and Latin America? What do you see as maybe something that's an alarm sign or something that's going wrong and which could potentially have explosive or negative repercussions?
Well, thank you, Professor Chaulia, for inviting me to this esteemed panel. Good morning from my end, because it's morning here. What I would say is that although in Europe and so forth, we're seeing a shift when it comes to discussions on the coronavirus, unfortunately, here in the hemisphere, we have been among the regions most affected. So for example, you have 1.5 million at least that has been affected by this virus in terms of death statistics in the region. So obviously, we are very much concerned about how it is that multilateral cooperation with various partners, including emerging countries like India, countries like China, and also the US, who is the regional hegemon. So we're very concerned about cooperating in order to address this common global threat. So I think in our region, this is still an issue for us moving forward. And how to address it, we would like to implement means of cooperation with traditional as well as non-traditional actors in the region. And I think basically that's what we focused on now from my view of what's happening in our region at this point.
Thank you, Kim. I'll also want to bring in my colleague, Professor Devika Mishra, who actually is the key student success coordinator for the online MAIRSs, but also teaches courses on Latin America and has specialized in Latin America at her doctoral degree level. Devika, that region, Latin America, with a lot of changes, there are a lot of big elections coming up this year. I believe Brazil has a very big presidential election, the largest country in the region. and we've had some recent return to the left in some of these countries in the form of elections, but there is also severe unrest and disenchantment with the economic downturns and the loss of social support safety nets and all that, and the rising inequalities, of course, always a perpetual problem. So, and then you have the so-called quote unquote the problem states like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, as you know, the crisis is endless and the number of refugees all over the region. So Devika, quickly, I would like you to reflect on the risks for that region, and then we can take some questions, especially relating to the MAIRSS. We are extending this seminar by 15 minutes, folks. So don't worry, we have a little bit of time. Devika.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chaulia. So I feel, I mean, if we really want to study crisis and shifts and transfers of power and transfers in ideology, I don't think there is a better region to study them, especially for us IR academics, than Latin America. As Professor Chaulia said, there's a very important election coming up in Brazil this year. We get to see what happens with Bolsonaro. There was recently, there were some 4, if not 5 elections that were concluded in 2021 with a fantastically transformative election in Chile, which truly spells new things and new, new kind of discourses happening in the region. So the region seems to be both post-right, because there seems to be disenchantment with the right, but it also seems to be post-left. What we've been talking about since that pink tide era, this exhaustion with post-progressivism, right? That logic is no longer making sense. Then you have a region which was always traditionally one of the most unequal regions in the world. And now you have the pandemic, which has significantly affected how economics is understood. You had several development logics tried and tested and rejected. So I think Latin America is going to be the region to really sort of understand what's going on. There were all these reports which spelled very bad economic recoveries for major countries in the region. And the newest sort of forecasts based on this have been much more promising than analysts had originally anticipated. What's going to happen if this global supply chain warfare that especially all of us in IR are very, very interested in, if this really pans out? How is Latin America playing it? In December, you had this huge meeting of the region in Mexico with the US, and then you had simultaneously, you had a China CELAC forum. So how is the region playing this entire angle? The information, the kind of policy preferences that are being forwarded about vaccines, something which I think Professor Ammourah and Professor Thapar were also mentioning. That's been very interesting. We could have a whole session on just talking about Latin America. So I'll limit myself to just mentioning that if you're interested in truly understanding how these global shifts and transfers are going to play, I believe the election in Brazil is going to be very, very important. It's very interesting what's happening in Venezuela politically. You've had Guaido kind of step back. There seems to be some sort of rapprochement happening. Ideology doesn't really make sense. It's no longer pure. I don't want to speak too much because we have 2 colleagues from the region here, but I'm just very curious. And I'll quickly throw this back to Professor Chaulia, so we have some time to talk about MAIRSS, the degree which has kind of connected us to you in this panel, and which we are offering with Coursera, and where many of our colleagues are obviously offering courses. So back to you, Professor Chaulia.
So folks, you've heard about our opinions on what is been happening around the world in different regions, the hotspots, the flashpoints, and what could be a likely place where you could see significant unraveling and greater instability. And obviously, nobody is a genius, or we are not Nostradamus to tell what exactly is going to happen. But surely with intelligence and with an eye and an attention to all these global crises, we can have a better, more informed opinion, well-rounded opinion, and hopefully influence policymakers as well as actors on the ground to step back from confrontation and violence and even war. But the point of the online MAIRSS is to educate students in these kinds of issues Our classrooms are full of these kinds of topics. What you heard today in the last 1 hour is simply a little bit of a teaser, if you like, to the full motion picture, which is the online MAIRSS. So I want to invite all of you to apply. The spring semester admissions are going on. We'll have plenty of time in the classroom to discuss these global crises and ongoing as well as historical issues as we go forward. Spring semester admissions are on. The deadline is coming up. So we have just 5 days or so. And I urge you all to visit the Coursera website and fill in your form. It's in a completely non-fee based application. We don't charge a single pie for anyone applying. But then the point is you will need to meet some criteria. And I'm happy to tell you that the last fall, when we admitted students in August and September, we had students from more than 20 countries in the class, and they are now entering their second semester. But we are opening up freshly for new people to come in for spring. So you, those of you who come in and who are eligible and who qualify after applying will be starting as a separate cohort from the one that came in fall. You will be starting with international relations theory and diplomatic practice, and then doing a course on war, weapons, and intelligence, and one on maritime security. So these are the first semester courses that are coming up, all very exciting. I'm also teaching myself along with many of my colleagues who spoke today, and you will come across us as your instructors as once you enroll in the degree program. There are a lot of questions about the ongoing crisis. Lot of people have asked questions not only about the Middle East and about Eastern Europe, which are obvious, which we took up at the top of the hour, but also there's a very interesting question by Sandesh about the Myanmar crisis. We seem to have forgotten it. Yes, I mean, there is resistance to the regime in Myanmar, but the military is also consolidated. So we don't know whether there will be some kind of a further conflagration there. We'll have to wait and see. An interesting parallel is what is happening in Sudan. Very similar to Myanmar. Military initially opened up, then closed, and now they have again retaken controls, and the people are protesting, and the people don't want military dictatorship, but you never know what will happen. So that tussle between people and authoritarian regimes, always it's a perpetual feature of the international horizon, and you'll see more of those, I'm sure, this year. Is there, I have an anonymous question, is there a safe region or country for the world one could bet on for the next decade? I think all of us are globally.
Norway, Sweden, Finland. That's it.
There you go. There you go. The Scandinavia.
Costa Rica also.
Costa Rica. Yeah.
Perhaps Latin America.
It has no army. It has no army.
I'm right now in Bogota, Colombia. They are not. The discourse here is like India. Yes, great civilization and all that. They are not aware of what's happening between India and China, for example. And I don't think they care much even about Ukraine. So they are very self-contained out here. Is this a peaceful region? I don't know. There are other experts to answer that.
Well, yeah, sometimes until a crisis comes to your doorstep, people don't take it too seriously. But so there is a question by Jinedu Abibu Mohammed. Can you touch on the coups happening in West Africa? 5 or 6 coups in the last 4 or 5 months, almost in the so-called Francophonie part of Africa, very disturbing. The Sahel region, unbelievable actually. I mean, it's almost like a coup contagion. Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and then there's Sudan, as I've already mentioned, and then more could come up as we speak. So,
Sreeram, can I just take 1 minute? Sorry.
Please, Mohan.
No, I think there is a reason for this, because I was very struck when you told me 5 coups. I had not thought of it. I think as there is a relative decline in US power, and as we see the international system getting fragmented, the regional crises now will be left to their own devices. Please don't take this the wrong way, but very soon the Myanmar crisis will be up to ASEAN. The superpowers have no interest in getting involved in Myanmar, frankly. And sanctions only work to a certain point. Same for Sudan. And with due respect to Latin America, I don't know if Devika will agree with me, but I genuinely think it's going to be an ignored region. Brazil might have some traction from time to time. So in these areas, the pent-up thing is now coming out. And we will see, I think, more and more regional crises in which the United States, Russia, and others, and Europe will refuse to get involved. I know a little bit about France's intervention in Mali. There are people in France who are saying, listen, why the hell are we getting involved? We've got our own problems.
It was a failure. 5 years they have been there in Mali, and now there's another coup. So, folks, we are almost out of time, but I want to briefly address all of you and urge you to think about applying to our MAIRSS program. It's the only one of its kind, a very, very affordable program, and something that, you know, where all these expert opinion that you heard in the last 1 hour and 15 minutes, you could have them as your professors, and you could have a lot more interaction. And I can guarantee you in the Coursera program is not just pre-recorded videos that you see, you also have live sessions with our professors. So, and these happen at frequent intervals throughout the semesters. So what happens is you actually get to learn from very learned people and people who have had a lot of practical experience, as you can see, having served in different regions of the world. So it's a truly global program and befitting a global class like all of you. So I want to urge you all to apply, and we will look at it favorably, provided you have a bachelor's degree, which of course is the prerequisite. Sometimes we get questions that, you know, I haven't received my bachelor's degree and can I still apply? I'm sorry, you need to have a bachelor's. Without that, that's the minimum prerequisite, and then there's an application process. So just go through it, please. It's all crystal clear. Please write to us at, is it online at jgu.edu.in? Devika, do you want to say?
Yes, I just wanted to kind of wrap up. I think you've already covered everything, but there were two questions that that I wanted to raise quickly. The first question was on scholarship. As Professor Chaulia has just mentioned, this is the most competitive and most affordable program that you could find for an MA in IRSS on Coursera. So unfortunately, we are not able to offer scholarships at this time, but you will find that as colloquially, we would say it's bang for the buck. Secondly, where should you be writing to us? You should be writing to us at online@jgu.edu.in. Our admissions director, Anshul, has constantly been putting links in the chat. He has also been sharing our webpage. He has been sharing the faculty profiles. If you would head over to our program website on Coursera, you will find a variety of pre-recorded videos. You will find access to even previous webinars that we have held with some of our colleagues who might not be present in this webinar, where you can find more information about the program. As Professor Chaulia has already mentioned, and again, Professor Mohan is the one who offers the course on diplomatic practice. He's also the program director for MA IRSS. So there are 3 of us here from the program staff. The deadline for applications for the spring cohort are on 12th February. So we urge you to apply, and we urge you to take a look at our website. Please write to us with any questions at online@jgu.edu.in. We'll be happy to kind of hold your hand through the process. So back to you, Professor Chaulia. That's all that I have to say.
Thank you, Devika. Thank you, folks. Thank you, all my distinguished colleagues. We have a large panel, so I will not name each and every one, but I think we learned a lot today. And the point is to keep an eye for the potential for risk and how to mitigate the risk. That's the only way we can navigate this our earthly journeys. Frankly, I mean, we are all born here, and we have tremendous problems, and we cannot shy away from them. We cannot certainly afford to be blissfully ignorant. This is not the time. This is my own view is that we are in an era of cascading crisis, one building up over the other, and it's a long, extended spell of crisis. So let's buckle up for it, and let's educate ourselves more. Let's acquire an advanced degree in this field, and we welcome your applications. We look forward to having you in our class sometime very soon. So thank you, everyone, and have a safe time, and do think about many of the points raised by our colleagues today and try to decipher and try to get to the bottom of a lot of these pressing global challenges and risks. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, everyone.
Thank you.